We must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. We are Americans.
Send a very strong message to Russia and to the world that the United States of America and her people are firmly on the side of Ukraine's sovereignty and Ukraine's desire for independence from Russia and ability to stabilize its country and moving forward. We could have sent a stronger message than the one that's being sent now.
Of all the objectives we seek, first and foremost is the establishment of lasting world peace. We must always stand ready to negotiate in good faith, ready to pursue any reasonable avenue that holds forth the promise of lessening tensions and furthering the prospects of peace. But let our friends and those who may wish us ill take note. The United States has an obligation to its citizens and to the people of the world never to let those who would destroy freedom dictate the future course of life on this planet.
36 years ago when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States. Ronald Reagan was the conservative movement at its best. At its best, conservatism is not about anger. At its best, conservatism is not about fear. At its best, the conservative movement is not about division. At its best, the conservative movement is about the belief in fundamental principles of limited government and free enterprise and a strong national defense and traditional values.
Tonight, President Trump parroting Russian propaganda as he falsely accuses Ukraine of starting the war, which began almost 3 years ago when Vladimir Putin's troops invaded Ukraine.
Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You should have never started it.
Right now, many of the polls is Donald Trump, and he's a con man. I mean, he's trying to convince voters that he's some sort of great leader and great conservative, great businessman. He's none of that. He's a failed businessman.
U.S. President Donald Trump repeated slam after slam, targeting Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
We are going to send the message that the party of Lincoln and Reagan and the presidency of the United States will never be held by a con artist.
If you called Zelensky a dictator, would you use the same words without including him?
I don't use those words lightly.
We have to recognize we have witnessed horrifying things, and we're going to see some really horrifying things here over the next few days. We just are. I mean, these Russian forces are now targeting civilian areas. They're firing with very powerful munitions against areas where, children are and women are and the elderly are, just civilian populations. They're committing war crimes, and I think those need to be documented, by the way, because the people doing that are going to have to stand up to justice one day. There's going to be, whether it's a new Nuremberg-type process or what have you, someone's going to have to answer for this down the road. The second is, obviously, we have to look, there's no way Putin wins. Okay, there's no win here. I mean, he may defeat the Ukraine military, he may occupy multiple cities in the country, but he'll never win because he's going to be faced with one of two choices. Either A, he's going to have to occupy a country where 40 million people don't want him there and are continuing to attack them, or B, he's going to get up and leave behind a puppet government, which the Ukrainians will quickly overthrow and they'll never accept. So he's either headed for a quagmire or he's headed for, a puppet government that's going to get overthrown the minute he's no longer there. Either way, it's not a win. So we've got to continue to impose a price on him for doing this. This has to be the most expensive adventurism in the modern history of the world, because if it isn't, he'll keep doing it, and if it isn't, other countries will do it as well. The world needs to see, and Putin needs to learn, that if he does this kind of thing, the price they will pay is devastating, and some of that's already happening. I mean, look, a week, you guys are the financial experts. Where's Russia's economy headed? A week from now, they're headed to third world territory in terms of the damage that they're suffering. They're completely isolated. They can't fly anywhere. They've got planes stuck all over the world. They can't even fly. So they've got massive problems. They're already paying a very heavy price. We need to make sure those things are sustained. I want to make one last point. I think it's important, no matter what happens in Ukraine, that there always be a legitimate government, be it in a rump state or in a part of Ukraine or in exile, that we recognize and that we support, that we continue to provide logistical support and weapons so that that insurgency will continue to inflict damage on the Russians until those occupiers leave.
The spotlight of world history swings to the White House.
Position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
cards. I'm not playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
I'm very serious, Mr. President. I'm very serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
You think
you're gambling with world wars? You're gambling.
What are you talking about?
And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
I'm with all respect to your country.
Far more than a lot of people say they should have.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
No,
even today.
You said thank
even
you.
Today.
Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can
not
just...
speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I answer?
No,
can I
answer? A lot of
answer?
talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong. From the very beginning of the war, we've been alone.
If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks. It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to the American people.
You're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money.
Well, I think there's a strong bipartisan consensus that the new international norm cannot be that a country can simply invade its neighbor, lie about it, and do so without repercussions. The first is we cannot accept as an established norm in the 21st century that a country can simply invade its neighbors because they don't like some political development going on within that country. I would also say that allowing this to stand would reward Russia to undertake this sort of activity in other parts of Europe in the future, which further destabilizing the regions. There must be consequences for this having happened. The reality of it is the U.S. economy is about a $16 trillion economy. The Russian economy is a $2 trillion economy. In terms of economic influence, Russia and the U.S. are not peers in that regard. It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated conflict, and frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. And it needs to come to an end. And no one has any idea or any plan to bring it to an end. The plan of the Ukrainians up to now and their allies on Capitol Hill and the people you talk to in other countries is, let's just keep giving them as much as they need for as long as it takes. That's not a strategy. And fell in the early 1990s. Ukraine was left with the world's third largest stockpile of tactical nuclear weapons and strategic nuclear weapons on the planet. But they signed this agreement with the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia that basically said, if you give up your nuclear weapons, we, these three countries that signed to this, will provide for your defense and assure you of your defense. And so Ukraine did that. They gave up these weapons. Well, now, this was signed in 1994, 20 years later, one of the three countries that signed that agreement hasn't just not provided for their defense, they actually invaded them. And I want to make a point on this for a second. Think about if you're one of these other countries around the world right now that feels threatened by your neighbors. And the United States and the rest of the world are going to you and saying, listen, don't develop nuclear weapons. Don't develop nuclear weapons, South Korea. Don't develop nuclear weapons, Japan. Don't develop nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia. We will protect you. We will watch out for you. What kind of lesson do you think this instance sends to them? I think the message this is sending to many nations around the world is perhaps we can no longer count on the security promises made by the free world. Perhaps we need to start looking out for ourselves. And that's why the Ukrainian situation is so much more important than simply what's happening in Europe. This has implications around the world. A very strong message to Russia and to the world that the United States of America and her people are firmly on the side of Ukraine's sovereignty and Ukraine's desire for independence from Russia and ability to stabilize its country and moving forward. We could have sent a stronger message than the one that's being sent now.
But you yourself, sir, have said before that you believe Putin is a war criminal, that is a widely accepted fact. You've called him a butcher. And you've said that as a Secretary of State, you do believe it's important for someone with such global influence as you have to speak with that kind of moral clarity.
Again, we go back to the same point. I'm not going to fall into this trap of the who's bad and who's evil. I'm not going to fall into this trap of the who's bad and who's evil. People can make those conclusions. People have seen how this narrative has played out and where we are today and how this all started and so forth. The point now is it has to end. And the way it ends is you get people to a negotiating table. And
the U.S. finally put pen to paper. The signing put into force the Strategic Arms Treaty, or START, the first ever accord to reduce long-range nuclear weapons. START 1 calls for the US and former Soviet Union to eliminate 9,000 long-range nuclear warheads.
Ukraine's move is a major step toward ensuring that nuclear missiles never again will be targeted at the children of our nations. I told President Kuchma that the United States will continue to work with Ukraine to dismantle completely its nuclear arsenal. In addition, Ukraine's decision will permit the United States, Russia, and the United Kingdom to extend formal security assurances to Ukraine.
Ukraine chose to give up nuclear weapons when the former Soviet Union dissolved. Your decision has made the Ukrainian people, the American people, and the entire world much safer and more secure.
America will stand with you to support your independence, your territorial integrity, and your reforms. Economic reform and nuclear weapons.
Get up.
Putin broke it and first took Crimea. And I feel terrible about it.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? Did I say that? Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Leader right now in many of the polls is Donald Trump, and he's a con man. I mean, he's trying to convince voters that he's some sort of great leader and great conservative, great businessman. He's none of that. He's none of that. He's a failed businessman. He's a failed businessman.
Because the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that